Hello and welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning into Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. We really appreciate you being here. And today I'm really happy to share with you this beautiful Irish coastal landscape scene with cliffs and mountains in the distance and a brooding sky. This is the photograph from Pixabay that I have used as inspiration. And as this is going to be a loose painting, I'm using it as a rough guide, something to inspire me, as a sort of a roadmap, if you see what I mean, rather than trying to paint it with too much detail. So first of all, a really loose sketch, just positioning the horizon line, the mountains, the cliffs, the cliff shapes. I'm leaving out the cottages that are in the distance, just keeping it nice and simple, trying to get the feeling of depth and distance. And just before the demo, please forgive me, I'm going to shamelessly plug my book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. It's available to buy from all good bookstores. You can find it online, and I'll leave a couple of links in the description below if you're interested in taking a look. And now back to the demo. I'm using Milford cold press watercolour paper. It's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape. It's a 1/4 imperial sheet, or 11 inches by 15 inches, 28 centimetres by 38 centimetres. And I'm going to paint the scene first using the wet in wet method. So I'm wetting the page all over with brush strokes that are sort of imitating what I want to paint with paint later. So using the same sort of brush strokes to wet the page, that gives me my directionality for the flow of water to start with. This is Payne's Grey, and I'm using my large wash brush. This is a Princeton Aqua Elite 1.5 inch modeler brush. And I'm spreading this really rich, almost tube consistency paint out across the wet page. You can see it running down the page a little bit where the board is tilted to about 20 to 30 degrees. I'm just moving the paint around, trying to keep it nice and loose. Just looking to build up a nice brooding sky, plenty of depth and distance, bit of perspective in the sky, getting paler as we come down to the horizon line, and using this pale Payne's Grey just to put in the first layer for my sea. Bringing it right up to the edge of the cliffs that I've drawn in. Again, keeping my brush strokes fairly horizontal, so I keep that water looking nice and flat. I think for a loose watercolour painting, the direction of my brush strokes are really important. Look at the organic free-flowing shapes in the sky, and now look at the different brush strokes that I get just simply from using the same brush and pale paint and just creating horizontal brush strokes to keep the water flat. And likewise, when I paint the cliffs and the grassy cliff tops with sap green and raw umber, I'm looking to change the direction of my brush to show a different plane of land or a different sort of directionality or slope of the landscape. So I hope you can see the way the different direction of brush strokes is really helping to build up the depth and distance in the different planes of land. And now I've dipped the tips of my modeler brush into my Payne's Grey and using really nice rich paint, and I'm following my pencil outline and dabbing in these sort of marks to suggest the rocks and boulders and cliffs as they tumble into the sea. There are different planes of land here, and I'm concentrating on differentiating between these rocky headlands, blending in these rocky headlands with the cliffs using a size 2 quill brush as well, flattening things out a bit with my 3/4 inch flat brush. putting in some of those further headlands really far back. They look a bit bold, but they'll diffuse into the damp paper, and I can soften those back a little bit more. Just bring across the start of my mountains in the distance. I'm going to build those up using the wet on dry method a bit later on when I've finished the wet in wet. This is my palette knife, and I'm using my palette knife to just scrape through some of those rocky marks just to further define and suggest the rocks, the cliff faces and the separation between them as they go back into the distance. And before everything dries, I'm scraping through the richer paint in the foreground so that I can draw in some grasses and flowers and things like that on the cliff edge. Just the suggestions of detail. I'm now going to lay my board flat because I don't need the paint to move and drift anymore. This is ordinary fine ground table salt. I'm just going to sprinkle a bit of that into the damp paint in the very foreground on this little bit of cliff that's nearest to us, where it should hopefully add some texture to the grasses and the wild flowers on the cliff edge. I now need to leave it to dry completely. So here's the dry painting so far. I've raised it back up to about 20 degrees tilt because that's my comfortable angle for painting. And I'm using a clean dry brush to brush off any salt crystals that haven't dissolved. And I'm really pleased with the texture that I've got for my foreground, and it helps to push the rest of the cliffs back into the distance. I'm using a light value watery mix of Payne's Grey and my size 2 quill brush. I'm going to be painting in my distant mountains, trying to make sure I keep the horizon lines nice and flat, working around my distant cliffs. Basically following my pencil guidelines, but keeping an eye on the photograph as well, just to make sure that I've got enough of these cliffs and that the values are right to create a good amount of aerial perspective. I want them to be a little bit darker than I'd normally paint them because of this dark brooding sky that's obviously throwing shadows over those distant mountains. Just going to use a clean damp flat brush to soften underneath those sort of rocky headlands so that they're nice and flat where they are entering into the water. Now adding a few darker marks and shadows between the grasses in the foreground. Changing to the fan brush, and then using Payne's Grey, sap green, and finishing off with some lemon yellow, just to really brighten up the foreground so that it becomes a little more defined than the cliffs in the distance, and this will help to push those distant cliffs backwards. Keeping it nice and loose, not painting any particular flowers, just suggesting the detail. Now I'm going to remove the tape and have a look at it and see how it looks with a clean white border, because this helps me to see it with fresh eyes. I can look at it again and see if it needs anything doing to it just to balance things up. But bearing in mind, I'm trying to keep this really loose, really fresh, just suggested detail. I think I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm quite happy with this because I think it creates the effects that I want to, of the foreground cliff where we're standing, and then that lovely expanse of land spreading back into the distance until we see those distant mountains getting lost in the cloud. I hope you found that helpful. This is a beginner-friendly demo. It might take a few goes to get it right if you're a beginner, but I think it's definitely well worth persevering with this. And remember, it's really important to consider the directionality of your brush strokes and use as big a brush as you can get away with for your paper. That will give you these lovely, soft, smooth transitions of paint when you paint wet in wet. Thank you so much for watching. Please click on the like button, and why not consider subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. It really does help with our reach, and it's free to do here on YouTube. And thank you so much to everybody that supports us on Patreon. We really do appreciate your support so much. If you'd like to support us, then please follow the links below. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.